You're listening to Migrants Criminally Charged After Failing to Register with U.S. Government, a news story written by Jeremy Roebuck and Marianne Levine and read by an AI-generated voice. The Justice Department is wielding a little-known law to criminally charge unauthorized immigrants who have failed to register their presence in the country, threatening them with potential jail time and fines under a new Trump administration initiative. The first prosecutions came just days after authorities on April 11th resurrected a federal registration requirement used during World War II to meet the goals of an executive order from President Donald Trump. Administration officials described the regulation, which mandates that people 14 and older provide fingerprints and home addresses, as a national security precaution that will allow authorities to more closely track the whereabouts of millions of immigrants in the United States. But the Justice Department's early attempts to win convictions against those who fail to register have faced skepticism and defeats before some federal judges. And the initiative has been met with sharp opposition from immigrant advocates, who warn that registering with the government could expose migrants to a greater risk of deportation. Since April 11th, when the Department of Homeland Security established a new immigrant registration form, prosecutors have used a statute created in 1940 to charge dozens of people across the country with failing to sign up. A misdemeanor offense punishable by up to 6 months in prison and $5,000 in fines. Although most cases are in the early stages of adjudication, at least 6 in which defendants challenge the charges have been thrown out by judges or withdrawn by prosecutors amid questioning from the courts, according to a Washington Post analysis of court records. More than a dozen others have already pleaded guilty. In some instances, judges chided prosecutors for relying on a statute that has not been widely enforced in more than half a century to target people who, until just weeks ago, had no way to comply. In an order, May the 19th, dismissing charges against 5 migrants in Louisiana, U.S. Magistrate Judge Michael B. North wrote that there was no evidence that any of these defendants knew they were required to register. And even if they had, until very recently, there was no mechanism for them to do so. One of the men was arrested on the day the new registry sign-up form went live on the website of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. The judicial skepticism has opened a new front in the clash between the Trump administration and the federal courts over the government's aggressive use of obscure immigration laws to advance the president's mass deportation agenda. Courts have temporarily blocked the administration's use of a rarely invoked wartime law to deport immigrants accused of being members of foreign gangs and ordered the return of several men removed from the country without legal due process. A judge in New Mexico has stymied government efforts to charge scores of immigrants with trespassing on military property after authorities declared wide swaths of the border an expanded military zone. As in the trespassing cases, the judges who have dismissed the failure to register charges base their decisions on doubts about whether the people charged, some of whom have lived in the country for years, understood that they were violating the law. Matthew Tragesser, a spokesman for USCIS, defended the administration's push as a success, saying more than 57,000 immigrants have signed up for the registry. Authorities did not provide details about their identities. For the first time in years, the Immigration and Nationality Act statute is being enforced, and there is finally broad recognition that failure to comply is a crime, Tragesser said in a statement. On his first day in office, Trump signed a flurry of immigration-related executive actions, including one titled Protecting the American People Against Invasion. That measure directed DHS to work with the Justice Department to resume enforcement of the registration requirement. The statute arose out of World War II-era fears that hostile foreign agents could be hiding in the U.S., and it mandated that non-citizens register their presence at their local post offices and carry proof of registration with them. After the war, federal officials stopped enforcing the requirement, though the law remained on the books. President George W. Bush briefly revived the registration mandate after the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks for men from predominantly Muslim countries. More than 10,000 people who registered were detained and deported before that registration system was dismantled under President Barack Obama in 2016. But even then, criminal prosecutions for failing to register were rare. As Trump dusted off the law this year, prosecutions were an explicit goal. In a memo to federal prosecutors in February, Attorney General Pam Bondi specifically highlighted the ability to charge people with failing to register, directing government lawyers to use all available criminal statutes to combat the flood of illegal immigration. At the time, however, there was no method for immigrants in the country to register, prompting DHS officials to move forward in March with a draft regulation for a new online registration form, written only in English. Under the new rules, those with visas or legal permanent residency, and those who have had previous contact with immigration authorities at U.S. ports of entry or through deportation proceedings do not have to register because their personal details are already on file. USCIS has estimated that between 2.2 million and 3.2 million immigrants are now required to sign up. Immigrant advocates say the threat of new criminal penalties has left those migrants with a perilous choice: register and risk deportation, or refuse and face possible criminal charges and eventual removal from the country anyway. Some view the registration requirement as part of the administration's efforts to pressure immigrants to leave the country voluntarily. Angelica Salas, executive director of the Los Angeles-based Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, said her organization put a notice on its website warning people about the legal implications. "It's actually a registry that has consequences," she said. "So what we tell everybody is, do not sign up for this without legal counsel. There's no benefit." Salas's group and other advocacy organizations filed a lawsuit in late March seeking to block the registration requirement. A federal judge in Washington denied their request just hours before the mandate took effect, April 11th. At that point, the judge said, there was no evidence that anyone had suffered concrete harm. Within days of his ruling, federal prosecutors in Louisiana filed one of the nation's first criminal cases related to the registry. Local sheriff's deputies arrested Osborne Nash Baden-Welcome, a Honduran national who had been living in the country without authorization for at least 3 years, after stopping him April 11th for a traffic violation as he was driving to his job near New Orleans. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents were alerted by local authorities and arrived days later at the Jefferson Parish Correctional Center to take custody of him. They charged him with failing to register with the government after discovering his name was not in the DHS database, which had launched on the agency's website the morning of his arrest. Over the next few days, authorities filed cases against at least 6 other immigrants in eastern Louisiana, all apprehended under similar circumstances, according to court records. These defendants evaded the legal way to enter the United States, and through doing that, they bypassed opportunity after opportunity to register in accordance with the law, Rick Veters, assistant U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Louisiana, said at a recent court hearing. North, the federal magistrate judge, dismissed the charges against Welcome, who remains in ICE custody, and 4 others. Prosecutors are pursuing an appeal in those cases. The other 2 cases were withdrawn by prosecutors because the defendants either had been or would be deported before their criminal cases were resolved. Since then, Justice Department lawyers in other states, including Alabama, Montana, and Texas, each filed a few similar cases. Most of those charged were arrested during ICE screenings at county jails or at roadside enforcement checkpoints, and all are facing civil deportation proceedings separate from their criminal cases. The U.S. Attorney's offices did not respond to requests for comment. At least 13 defendants have pleaded guilty to charges of failing to register and have either been removed from the country or are in deportation proceedings, according to court records. But even some of those who have successfully fought the criminal charges have been deported after immigration courts found them to be in the country without legal status, according to their lawyers. Michelle Lapointe, legal director of the American Immigration Council, which has challenged the registry requirement in court,